This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast. I'm agronomist Brian Schrader from the eastern side of the Indiana, and I'm joined this morning by my co-host and interviewee, Ben Jacobs. So good morning, Ben. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Brian. I'm doing well. I think that long-term listeners of the podcast will find me probably less of a host and more of an interviewee in several of the episodes. So it's probably familiar territory for us.
Oh, that's all right. Well, we are continuing on. It's been a little bit. We took a bit of a hiatus because of the growing season and some other things, but we want to do another edition of Getting to Know Your Agronomist, and Ben is up this time. And so he and I are going to chat a little bit about his history, how he arrived where he has with Pioneer and other things, and just learn a little bit more about Ben this morning. So Ben, maybe let's just start at the beginning, as they say. Where'd you grow up and how did you make your way into agriculture? Maybe let's start there.
Yeah. So Brian, let me start with, and I think you've probably learned this. You've known me long enough. I'm a fairly private individual, but I do think these are important, and I think it's interesting to see the paths that everybody has taken to get to these roles, right? Because it's not been a straight line for almost anybody. And you know, it's interesting to me, given the path that I took, which we'll discuss. And also I think that, you know, it is a case study on how to get to where you want to with your professional goals. I mean, it's really been interesting to me from that standpoint. So let's start with the beginning. I grew up on a small farm in west central Indiana in Sullivan County, to be exact, with a couple of brothers. We farmed, around 1,000 acres, give or take, depending on the year, until I would say around 2004. It really wasn't enough to support multiple families at the time, and just, you know, the decision had to be made as there was a generation retiring and still needing some income from, and how all that balances out. So the decision was ultimately made, you know, when I was a teenager, probably in my early teens, that we were going to close up shop. Jacob Farms Incorporated was no more, which, as a little redneck kid, I guess, who always just assumed that was what was going to happen, right? You know, there wasn't really a question of what am I going to do when I grow up. It's like, well, it's already been preordained, right? This is what
sure.
you do. So, you know, to how I got here, Brian, that's really where it starts. You got to figure out, what the heck am I going to do now?
So, Ben, did you have other things? I mean, I think you and I are very similar in this. To your point, well, there's other interests there, but that was kind of what you expected a little bit. Did you have other interests that before you headed to school you explored, or did you just absolutely know that the jump from, well, the farm to agriculture in some career path, that just was what was going to happen?
Yeah, so agriculture as a career path was not on the radar at all.
Okay.
Until later in life. You know, I became, I guess, a professional, Brian, because I couldn't figure out how to make a living with my bow, is the joke that I would say around it.
Fair enough.
You know, if I'd had my druthers as a teenager, I probably would have became like a mountain bum or something. Just moved out to Montana and been, I don't know that I could have become a hippie, but I could have become some sort of vagrant mountain person. You know?
Okay. Yep.
And probably been pretty happy for a little while, but no,
a Jeremiah Johnson type. That's what
somewhere in there maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, there wasn't really, ag was not really on the career path. So, you know, taking the advice that I got from some people, you know, you're supposed to pursue a STEM career. My older brother was already at Purdue, pursuing an engineering degree, so I went to Purdue and started in the College of Engineering.
Okay.
I graduated high school, and that was the route that I was going to take. There was a brief stint in there where I rolled around the idea of joining the electricians union, which
Okay.
I think would have still, in retrospect, I think would have been a fine career path. But at the time, if you want to be successful, you go to college. And
Yep.
I'm not, obviously, I'm not disappointed in how that decision worked out, but it will get there. It was a little bit of a winding path. So having met me, Brian, or anybody that's probably ever met me can probably guess that the College of Engineering was not the place for me. And so I was at Purdue, not doing what I wanted to do and just absolutely hemorrhaging money. So I left after a
Okay.
year. I worked, I was managing the hunting department of a sporting goods store in Lafayette and
Okay.
making what seemed like just a fortune because I had 5 roommates. And so, but all good things come to an end. That place closed up shop. I ended up working construction as an iron worker for a couple of years. Um, Met and married my wife in that time frame, and got more ambition, we'll say, is
Okay.
probably fair. Wanted more stability in my life, so it just happened to work out that I had the opportunity to go back and finish at Purdue, and that's when I chose to pursue a career in agriculture. Right? After I'd sampled quite a few things of what the world had to offer,
Sure.
career wise, I thought, this if I'm going to spend the money and the time to do it, this is what I want to do. Right?
Okay.
Because there are many ways you can make a living, if you're going to do something that you enjoy. I had the experience to get there, so I went back and finished in 2 years. Dr. Miller, when we had him on, he talked about his PhD being a business trip. Um, Going back as a married adult, your wife is supporting you to some degree. It makes it a very much a business trip
Oh,
to
sure.
going back to West Lafayette. And
Yep.
so in and out in 2 years, and I've been with Pioneer ever since.
Okay.
Um,
So in and out at Purdue and then on with Pioneer. Your Pioneer path, in my opinion, would be just as windy as what your career path to uh, Purdue and out and then back has been as well. I think for most of our listeners, it's no surprise that you're kind of our resident research expert on the
yeah.
podcast because of the time that you've spent in research. So you leave Purdue, I take it, come right straight to Pioneer. What did that move look like for you, and where'd you start, and kind of walk us through that path?
So my lone internship in my 2 years of serious college was with Pioneer in research, in Windfall, and it was intentional because it was a novelty to me. I understood production, right? I had some experience with actually growing a crop, and there's seed production in the area. I didn't actually detassel as a kid because I made more money throwing hay, but everybody that
Sure.
I went to high school with detasseled, and so I was familiar with that. But how we got to that point was still a complete mystery, and so I thought, well, this is also an opportunity that I won't have to relocate for too, which was
Yeah.
certainly in the calculus, given where I was at in my life, and so took the internship there. Really enjoyed it. Felt really stupid, basically the whole time. And so this is some place that I need to spend time, right, to get figured out. So um, it just worked out. The stars aligned that there was an opening. Not right when I graduated, but shortly after, I worked in that same building, I guess as an intern technically for a second time, but to wait on some wait on the stars to align a little bit to
Sure.
have a full time opportunity come up. So I started as a research associate, was the job title, just supporting just supporting corn breeding. And early on, it's a somewhat mundane task, right? Until you've got the experience to do more, it is a lot of honestly, it's a lot of counting in various ways at the time, right? Counting seed stand counts, we didn't take lodging counts or disease, like it's a lot of, but a lot of it's outside, and I enjoyed that part of it. And if you have the ability to focus and output a quality product, it works out pretty well, and the opportunity comes, right? When you do that, you have to prove to be reliable. So I came into research at a really interesting time because there was a there was a plethora of new technology entering the landscape, and I came in right at the very beginning of it, where stuff kind of didn't work yet, and everybody that was established really didn't want to or really didn't have the time to deal with it. And so it created a lot of opportunity for somebody that had the patience and the interest, or at least the ambition to look to do something new, to take some of those things on. Um, and it worked out, right? They ended up, what they said, this is going to be the future. It ended up being the future. So, and some of the things I'm talking about are like automated seed filling and the automated planters that you may or may not have seen out in research plots. And that kind of pivoted into drone work. I've been flying drones in some capacity for this company since 2014,
Yeah.
so pretty early on in the UAV process. And that kind of just translated into let's test sensors and see what we can get out of them. And a lot of this stuff, Brian, just because it was in research, and it comes off as making me sound smarter than I really am. I did the grunt work, right? The field work, the
Yeah.
physical aspect of it. And a ton of data quality, right?
Sure.
So when people think the algorithms and the computer learning, that is not me. Right?
No,
That's
no.
that's not me at all. But so
Yeah,
yeah,
but you were critical of getting those things done. You were the validation,
I like to think
of
so.
those things.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so but yeah, it was a winding path, and it was just as new things came on board, it seemed like um, they're always looking for somebody to raise their hand and say I've
Yeah.
got it. And that's you don't always get the opportunity to come in and develop early on in your career in an environment like that, particularly in ag. I mean, ag's
Right.
been kind of stodgy and slow in a lot of
Yeah.
generations.
Yeah.
There were probably people that were retiring when I came in that were doing things pretty stinking similarly to how, I mean, maybe they moved to a computer completely,
Yeah. Yeah.
spreadsheets, but
Yeah.
there's been rapid change and all that, and being in the right place at the right time, and having the open mind, the willingness to say, I'll I'll do my best to figure it out, right? And
Yeah.
so kind of led to more opportunities. And with that, we expanded from just corn to supporting corn, soybeans, and wheat, which has served me well as I moved into this role. And then that transition, they had an opportunity. They were standing up a group, and we've had my former manager, Jason DeBrine, on this podcast to talk about nitrogen,
Yep.
um, to stand up the predictive ag group in the Eastern Corn Belt, which was just really an incredible opportunity for me. Um, and Jason was outstanding to work for, and it really challenged my ability to think. I'm going to say as a scientist,
Sure.
and to understand experimental design better, and how to make sure we're learning what we want to learn out of doing something, but really move into systems trials instead
Yeah.
of genetic trials. But that was really interesting work. A lot of it involved nitrogen, but it was really the grunt work side of it was crop physiology portion of it, but building out all the data points that it takes to build a crop growth model. The machine learning that everybody talks about, this machine learning is so great. It's great if you have an unlimited data supply to feed it on the
Yeah,
back end, and to let
sure.
if you give it enough information to learn, it'll learn the right thing. But it's a garbage in, garbage out situation still,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that I really enjoyed that job, Brian. I came with a new title, senior research associate.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I got to age up. I got to see a lot of the country. My joke is not that much of a joke. When I was running nitrogen trials, if they grow corn there in the lower 48, um, there's a good chance that I've seen it and put a nitrogen trial out there. So,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
I think that was probably the first time I met you. I think you were working for Jason and you were doing those trials. And I think that if I recall right, I think we actually probably met the first time at a windfall, uh, agronomist type meeting. And I think you and Jason were both there is where we met the first time. And so, and I
right,
couldn't tell you a year at all, Ben, but I think what I would like our listeners to get out of the things that you've talked about so far is twofold. One, your perseverance, and that comes through even today when you and I talk about the things. Hey, I'm going to try this and I'm going to get it right. It may take me forever, but I'm going to get it right, and I appreciate that. I think the other thing that you have done, and it again, knowing your story like I do, and having become friends with you over the last few years, I understand is this idea of you and your willingness to put yourself in positions where you don't know anything about the particular subject but want to learn. You specifically put yourself in those positions. And I think that there are a lot of us that don't want to do that. We're uncomfortable with not feeling like we know what's going on. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate about you the most is that, hey, it's not uncommon to hear Ben say, I have no idea, but I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens. And so I can appreciate that. So
yeah. Well, I thank you, Brian, for saying that. And I think that's it's probably somewhat ingrained in my DNA. I've looked at my dad and my grandfathers and their projects. They've all been very creative, good with their hands, um, but they do something once. I've
yeah,
built this. It's time to move on to something different. I'm not going to build 100 of whatever this is.
yes,
Whether
yep.
that's with woodworking, or like building a sand rail, or if there's been a hovercraft around here at some time.
Okay.
Things
Yep.
like that. Just whatever
Yep.
whatever that might be. So I think you're doing it for the experience and the knowledge you gain, right? And
Yep.
that's kind of been built into the situation. So, I guess that kind of gets us pretty close, Brian. The last, I guess, the last big step is how I end up here,
Sure. Yep.
from research. And I figured out pretty early on in my research career that this was where I wanted to end up, in the agronomist role. And I owe that probably in no small part to the person that hired me as an intern originally. Folks on this podcast probably listening to this podcast would be familiar with Brian Bush, who was the station manager at Windfall when I was hired as an intern, and I stayed in touch with him. And it took, probably about a year, right, before I'd kind of lost a little bit of that. My feet aren't even touching the ground feeling, and talking to Bush about what he's doing. And that sounds pretty interesting. And I think that, so you might notice that from that year in to the amount of things we've talked about, that was not a quick transition to saying, hey, I want to do this. I got told no a lot from a lot of different people. Uh, some of whom have been on this. Yeah, some of them have definitely
Yes.
this podcast. Yeah,
Yes.
they said no, but they didn't say no forever. They said
Right.
no. Here's what we need to work on, right, to get you there, which I appreciate. And and I think that both are neither one of those things would have been bad, right? If somebody in that process would have said, no, we don't think you have it, and here's why, um, that's beneficial too, right? You can weigh that as an individual and decide,
Yep.
hey, I'm going to pivot, or so. Both of those conversations are critical, and hopefully in an organization, the leadership has the ability and the stomach to have those conversations, because they are critical to employees developing. And you mentioned that the path earlier, Brian, and it's I was just fortunate to encounter um, some good managers, not all of them, a couple of them that
Yeah, sure.
that
Yep.
that fit really well with, and what do you need, what are the tools you need to succeed, right? um, but it took a long time to get there, and it really kind of lined as a perfect storm. As much as I liked working for Jason, and as much as I liked the work we were doing around crop physiology, it really hits me in stride as a scientist, and as an agronomist. That's where a lot of my interest lies. And when you can combine fertility and crop physiology both, that's about perfect for me. It was just too much travel,
Sure.
right? And mentioned that I will try and keep this discussion mostly professional. Right? That's the way I'm wired. But if I'm being quite honest, just had too many kids to be traveling that much, Brian.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
And
No.
so yeah, it lined up at the right time that there happened to be a reorganization on the commercial side where they were adding agronomist headcount. Um, you know, I got in touch with, I think, the only district lead in Indiana that hadn't told me no already for being an agronomist, or maybe he told me no once. Mikey did tell me no once already. Um, I'm pretty sure he did. Anyway, I talked to him a little bit. Say, hey, here's what I've been doing to prepare, and met Heath in person, had a conversation with him, and in retrospect, I think his mind was probably made up. I do know also that some of those other district leads, at least one of those other district leads who had told me no previously, also told Heath, hey, you need to make sure you give him an opportunity to make his
Sure.
case.
Yep.
Okay. It didn't work out for this reason, but it really should have. So, and I bring that up, like this is kind of seems like self-aggrandizement, but I bring that up just to say that, you know, ag is a tiny, tiny community. Your reputation matters
Yes.
100%, and you never know what interaction is going to be positive or negative down the line on it. So just keep your reputation intact, treat people with dignity and respect, and I think that, and just try and keep a generally positive outlook. And I think it'll go a long way forever. I think that it's went a long way for me, I guess. So it
Sure.
worked out beautifully, Brian. The
Yep.
territory that I cover, I moved back. I live a mile away from the house that I grew up in.
Yep.
Right. I support the growers in the counties that I grew up with. And if it's not right here where I grew up, it's in an area where I manage the research cooperators. Right. So I know the area as well. I know the soils. I know the people, and it just couldn't have lined up more perfectly as far as having a geography tailor made for me. You know.
Sure.
So for that I'm quite grateful. But like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a winding road, right? And none of us have gotten here in the same way. You know,
Right.
I didn't mention I also went to Iowa State for their distance ed program, because I thought a graduate degree was the cost of entry for one of these roles. I don't know whether that's true or not. I think it probably helps, but I think that your reputation and your network
Yeah.
are more important,
Yep.
it's equally important. So, and it's good to have, right? So,
Sure.
um, but yeah, that gets us to here. I came down here on to work with Dan Emmert and Brian Bush and Heath Gardner, and here we are just a few years later, and I'm the old man on the
You're the one
agronomy
left.
team, and
Yep.
so it's been constant change, which is good. I
Yep.
I I enjoy the challenge of change and everything, but I am I'm very grateful to be in this role. I'm very grateful for the people I get to work with, the growers that I get to work with, especially those that can challenge me and force me to grow. I think that one of the most powerful things you can do as an individual is have the courage to say, I don't know, but I will find out. And especially when you're interacting with customers in a technical role,
Yeah.
it's very, very easy to slip into that mindset that I have to know everything because I'm a quote unquote expert. And
Yeah.
it's just not feasible to know.
Yeah.
There's too many variables and too many situations. And if you think that you do know everything, boy, you're going to be in a bad spot. So,
Yep, for sure. Yeah.
so yeah,
Well, I'm gonna throw one more out here, and I'll let you answer it how you want. I know that if it's not Pioneer related, there's probably one of two places that we would find you. And so you've alluded to both of them, and I'm just gonna let you kind of fill in the blanks where you'd like to fill in. But if I can't find you in a cornfield, the next place I'm going to check is the woods someplace, and usually it would be on a mountain out west. You had mentioned managing the outdoor store. I know you have a passion for big game hunting, and so talk just a little bit about that, if you would, where you want to, about your interest in that, how that developed, and I know that's a big part of who you are, Ben. So I wouldn't want folks not to know about that.
yeah. Well, it's interesting because I have mentioned I've got a couple of brothers. I'm in the middle, one younger, one older, and neither one of them quite have that bug the same as I do. And I I don't really know why that is, but I think for me, I can tell you there are two probably really formative experiences. The very first deer that I shot was I mean, on the wall next to me, at least his antlers are. He's a little 8 point, and my dad put him in the bed of the truck, and we went everywhere. We went to the coffee shop, and we went to the bait shop where all the old men were, and we went to his buddy over here and his buddy over there, and it was it was a lot of very positive attention, right, for a young man.
Sure.
And, and the comment came up, well, don't get used to shooting in this big, and he's not a giant buck by any means. It's still the smallest buck that I've ever shot, and so I mean that was really formative. And then
Sure.
a few years after that, I taught myself more or less how to. I had a little bit of help, right? How to shoot a bow, and I I guess that first year I didn't shoot anything with a bow, but the second year I shot a deer with a bow, um, and it was complete. I almost fell out of a tree, right? And I'm instinctive, no sights or anything, right?
Yeah,
Just
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
and it was a whole new experience for me, and I just became absolutely obsessed with archery and bow hunting, and I still am to some degree, um, but I maybe at some point when my body starts to deteriorate a little bit more, I'll have an inclination to pick up a gun a little bit more often, but it's just I if it doesn't hit you that way, it's impossible to explain it to somebody, but it is an absolute thrill. And I just like watching critters too,
Sure.
right? Even if I know
Yep.
I don't have an opportunity to, I've had some outstanding experiences out west outside of hunting seasons, midsummer, like my wife and I eating lunch probably 40 yards away from a herd of big horn rams, a
Yeah.
bachelor group of big horn rams, by Glacial Lake in Montana. Like there's things that you don't forget, and they all, the lake would have been fine, the rams would have been fine, everything together
Yeah.
kind of added up. So it's just,
Yeah. You bet.
and I think it goes back to it's I've been naive or arrogant enough, whichever version you want to go with, to think like, especially with white-tailed deer. A couple of times in my 20s, I was on a real hot streak for finding and shooting big bucks with a bow.
Sure.
And I thought a couple of times, man, I've got these critters figured out. And I get humbled every time. And I'm almost 40 years old and I don't have them figured out. I'm getting
Yep.
better, right? They're getting more predictable, but they still throw me for a loop on, on multiple occasions. And it's so, yeah, it's, I don't know that that answers the question, Brian, how do we get here? But it
Nope.
just hits me in stride. And
Yep.
I think that if I'd never picked up a bow, that it wouldn't be that way. I think
Sure.
that the archery aspect of it's what really connected the dots for me. I mean, certainly the involvement, like I said, dad and taking around and showing off,
Yeah.
that really gets your attention early on. But yeah, that's a roundabout way of how we got here. But yeah, you are right. I absolutely enjoy the outdoors. And finding new ways to do that. That for a long time that was going out west, and it still is. That's big. That's a big world out there when it's just
Yeah.
you doing backpack hunting. As a Midwesterner, it's a really interesting experience. But increasingly as my kids get older, it's figuring out how to share that with them.
Sure. Yep.
So
Yep.
that's a unique challenge all of its own. It requires Boy, it requires you to shrink your ego down a bunch, right? And put your own ambitions on the back shelf a little bit. So,
Yep.
but yeah, it's a new experience, it's a new challenge, and I'm really enjoying that one as well.
Good. Well, Ben, we've covered a lot of ground. I certainly have enjoyed. I've picked up some things about you this morning that I certainly didn't know completely about. And so, I guess anything that you'd like to add to the story here before we call it an episode?
Yeah, I mean, I just be open to where life's going to take you. The other thing that's probably significant in my life right now that we didn't bring up, is the sheep. My wife raises club lambs. I support that habit. As the kids are getting older, not financially support it. That's not what I meant. I support
No,
her
I do
having.
what you meant.
You know, that was brand new to me. I'd never been around a sheep a day in my life, and so they're interesting critters. Every single one of them ever was born looking for a place to die. Uh,
Absolutely.
so, but yeah, they're as kids are getting old enough to start 4-H here in years coming up. I think that one will be more interesting as well. And also, as the kids get old enough to provide input, and I can go back to my real wheelhouse of being the hay and manure guy,
Yeah.
uh, and not as well. What do you think about this sheep? How are crossing these two? And like, I don't know. I really don't know. I didn't grow up showing livestock, and so
Sure.
has been a new experience in my marriage for me. But
Yep.
can't say that it's not been enjoyable. And you know, I like being married, and my wife likes having show sheep, so we have show sheep.
There
So
you go. Perfect. Works out for everybody, doesn't it? So,
yeah, so yeah, no, but we should have a good batch of lambs on the ground here, starting really around the first of the year. So yeah, if you have kids interested in 4-H, I would be glad to talk to them about 4-H as well as growing corn too.
yep.
So,
All right, good deal. Well, it's like I say, Ben, I've enjoyed our time here this morning, getting to know you a little bit better. I hope that the listeners uh, have as well. Just understanding your background and how you arrived at the position that you've arrived at. And Ben's got a lot of really great stories about some research things that if we had more time, I'd have him tell us some stories about trying to get his first drone license and all those kind of things. Those are fun. Maybe we'll touch on those down the road a little bit later, Ben. But with that, I guess if somebody does want to reach out to you, maybe talk about bow hunting or maybe show sheep, or I guess they could talk to you about corn or soybeans. How can somebody reach out to you, Ben?
yep, you can find me most active on X, formerly known as Twitter, at the Ben Jacob, and sometimes posting on Facebook at Ben Jacob Agronomy.
All right. Well, we appreciate Ben. We, as part of our hosting team for the podcast, but appreciate him just as much or more for being a good friend and an excellent agronomist as well. And so, with that, we hope that you've enjoyed getting to know fellow agronomist Ben Jacob just a little bit more, and we'll call it an episode. So, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy Podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.